Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliette Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. New stories are posted every month on the second Sunday at 2:30 p.m. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube page or following our Facebook. As a reminder, some stories contain adult language and content. It is recommended you review stories before allowing younger audiences to listen.
Hello, my name's Robert Tobias. I'm one of the reference librarians here at the Morgan Memorial Library. And today for adult story time of Word of Mouth, I've got just a little something different. Today I will be reading from Agatha Christie's short story collection known as The Early Cases of Hercule Poirot. And today we'll start off with one called The Chocolate Box. It was a wild night outside. The wind howled malevolently. The rain beat against the windows in great gust. Poirot and I sat facing the hearth, our legs outstretched to the cheerful blaze. Between us was a small table. On my side it stood some carefully brewed hot toddy. On Poirot's was a cup of thick, rich chocolate which I would not have drunk for 100 pounds. Poirot sipped the thick brown mess from a pink china cup and sighed with contentment. "Ah, que belle vie," he murmured. "Yes, it is a good old world," I agreed. "Here I am with a job, a good job too, and here you are famous." "Oh, mon ami," protested Poirot. "But you are, and rightfully so. When I think back on your long life successes, I'm positively amazed. I don't believe you know what failure is." "You would be a droll kind of original who could say that." "No, but seriously, have you ever failed?" "Innumerable times, my friend. What would you, le bon chance say? It cannot always be on your side. I have been called too late. Very often another working towards the same goal has arrived there first. Twice I have been stricken down with illness, just when I was at the point of success. One must take the downs with the ups, my friend." "I didn't quite mean that," I said. "I meant, have you ever been completely down and out over a case through your own fault?" "Ah, I comprehend. You ask if I ever been made a complete prize ass of myself, as you say here." "Once, my friend." A slow, reflective smile hovered over his face. "Yes, once I made a fool of myself." He sat suddenly in his chair. "See here, my friend, you have, I know, kept a record of my little successes. You shall add one more story to that collection, a story of my failure." He leaned forward and placed a log on the fire. Then, after carefully wiping his hands on a little duster that hung on a nail by the fireplace, he leaned back and contemplated his story. "That of which I tell you," said Monsieur Poirot, "took place in Belgium many years ago. It was a time of terrible struggle in France between the Church and the State. Monseigneur Paul Dollard, a French deputy of note. It was an open secret that the portfolio the minister had was awaiting him. He was among the bitterest of the anti-Catholic party, and it was certainly that on his ascension to power he would face violent enmity. He was in many ways a peculiar man. He never drank nor smoked. He was nevertheless not so scrupulous in other ways. You comprehend, Hastings? C'était des femmes, toujours des femmes. He had married some years earlier a young lady from Brussels who had brought him a substantial dowry. Undoubtedly the money was used in his career, as his family was not rich, though, on the other hand, he was entitled to call himself Monsieur le Baron if he chose. There were no children of the marriage, and his wife died 2 years later, the result of falling downstairs. Among the property which she bequeathed him was a house on the Avenue Louis in Brussels. It was in this house that his sudden death took place. The event coincided with the resignation of the minister, whose portfolio he was to inherit. All the papers long noticed his career. His death, which had taken place quite suddenly in the evening after dinner, was attributed to heart failure. At the time, mon ami, I was, as you know, a member of the Belgian detective force. The death of Monsieur Deloard was not particularly interesting to me. I am, as you know, bon Catholic, and his demise seemed to me fortunate. It was 3 days afterwards, when my vacation had just begun. I received a visitor at my own apartment, a lady, heavily veiled, but evidently quite young. I perceived that once she was jeune fille to a fée commune fée. Um, quite frankly, a young lady very troubled. You are Monsieur Hercule Poirot? She asked in a low, sweet voice. I bowed. Of the detective service? Again I bowed. Be seated, I pray you, mademoiselle, I said. She accepted the chair and drew aside her veil. Her face was charming, though marred with tears and haunted as though with some poignant anxiety. Monsieur, she said, I understand that you are now taking a vacation. Therefore, will you be free to take up a private case? You understand that I do not wish to call the police. I shook my head. I fear what you ask is impossible, mademoiselle. Even though I'm on vacation, I am still of the police. She leaned forward. Écoutez, monsieur. All I ask is that you investigate. The results of your investigations are a perfect liberty to report to police. If what I believe is true, we shall need all the machinery of the law. That placed me somewhat different contemplation earlier, and I placed myself at her service without a moment's ado. A slight color rose to her cheeks. I thank you, monsieur. It's the death of Monsieur Paul Dillard that I ask you to investigate. Comment? I exclaimed in surprise. Monsieur, I have nothing to go upon, nothing but my instinct. But I am convinced, I tell you, that Monsieur Dillard did not die a natural death. But surely the doctors may be mistaken. He was so robust, so strong. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, I beseech you to help me. The poor child was almost beside herself. She would have knelt to me. I soothed her the best I could. I will help you, mademoiselle. I feel almost sure that your fears are unfounded, but we will see. First, I ask you to describe the intimates of the house. I will therefore help you just this first. There are the domestics, of course, Jeanette, Felicine, and Denise, the cook. She had been there many years. The others are simple country girls. Also, there is Francois, but he is an old servant. Then there is Monsieur Dillard's mother, who lived with him, and myself. My name is Virginie Mansard. I am a poor cousin of late Madame Dillard, Monsieur Paul's wife. I've been a member of their menage for over 3 years. I have now described to you the household. There were also 2 guests staying in the house. And they were Monsieur de Saint-Allard, a neighbor of Monsieur Dillard in France, and also an English friend, Mr. John Wilson. Are they still with you? Mr. Wilson, yes, but Monsieur de Saint-Allard departed yesterday. And what is your plan, mademoiselle? If you present yourself at the house in the half an hour's time, I'll have arranged some story to your account for your presence. I had better represent you connected with journalism in some way. I shall say you've come from Paris, and you have brought a card of introduction from Monsieur de Saint-Allard. Madame de la Rue is very feeble of health and will pay little attention to the details. On Mademoiselle's ingenious pretext, I was admitted to the house, and after a brief interview with the dead deputy's mother, who was wonderfully imposing and aristocratic figure, though obviously in failing health, I was made free of the premises. I wonder, my friend, continued Poirot, whether you can possibly figure to yourself the difficulties of my task. Here was a man whose death had taken place 3 days prior. If there had been foul play, only one possibility was admissible: poison. I had no chance of seeing the body. There was no possibility of examining or analyzing any medium in which the poison could have been administered. There were no clues, false or otherwise, to consider. Had the man been poisoned? Had he died a natural death? I, Hercule Poirot, nothing to help me, had to decide. First, I interviewed the domestics, and with their aid, I recuperated the evening. I paid especial notes to the food at dinner and the method of serving. The soup had been served by Monsieur Dillard himself from a tureen. Next, the dish of cutlets, then of chicken. Finally, a compote of fruit. It had all been placed on the table and served by Monsieur himself. The coffee was brought up in a big pot to the dining table. Nothing there, mon ami. Impossible to poison one without poisoning all. After dinner, Madame Dillard had retired to her own apartments, and Mademoiselle Vignier had accompanied her. The three men adjourned to Monsieur Dillard's study. They had chatted amicably for some time, when suddenly, without any warning, the deputy had fallen heavily to the ground. Monsieur de Saint Alard had rushed out, and Francois had fetched the doctor immediately. He said it was without doubt apoplexy, he explained to the man. But when the doctor arrived, the patient was sadly past help. Mr. John Wilson, to whom I was presented by Mademoiselle, was what was known in those days as a regular John Bull Englishman, middle-aged and burly. His account, delivered in very British French, was substantially the same. Delouard went very red in the face and fell down. There was nothing further to be found out there. Next, I went to the scene of the tragedy, the study, and was left alone at my own request. So far, there was nothing to support Mademoiselle Maisonnard's theory. I could not believe that it was a delusion on her own part. Evidently, she had entertained a romantic passion for the dead man, which had not permitted her to take a normal view of the case. Nevertheless, I searched the study with very meticulous care. It was possible that a hypodermic needle might have been introduced to the dead man's chair in such a way as to allow a fatal injection. A minute puncture that it would have caused would have likely gone unnoticed, but I could discover no signs to support such a theory. I flung myself down the chair with a gesture of despair. Enfant, I abandoned it, I shouted aloud. There is no clue anywhere. Everything is perfectly normal. As I said the words, my eyes fell on a large box of chocolates standing near the table, and my heart gave a great leap. It may not be a clue to Monsieur Dillard's death, but here at least was something that was not normal. I lifted the box. The box was full, untouched, not a chocolate was missing. But that only made it peculiar that my hand caught but my eye more striking. For you see, Hastings, while the box itself was pink, the lid was blue. Now one often sees a blue ribbon on a pink box, or vice versa, but a box of one color, a lid of other. No. Decidedly, something was missing. Ce n'est pas chez vous jamais. I did not, as yet, see this little incident was anything of use to me, yet I determined to investigate it as being out of the ordinary. I rang the bell for Francois, and asked him if his late master had been fond of sweets. A faint melancholy came to smile upon his lips. Passionately fond of them, monsieur. He would always have a box of chocolates in the house. He did not drink wine of any kind, you see. Yet this box has not been touched. I lifted the lid to show him. Pardon, monsieur, but there was a new box purchased on the day of his death, the other being nearly finished. Then the other box was finished the day of his death, I said slowly. Yes, monsieur, I found it empty this morning and threw it away. Did Monsieur de Delouard eat sweets at all hours of the day? Usually after dinner, monsieur. I began to see the light. Francois, can you be discreet? If there is need, monsieur. Bon. Know, then, that I am of the police. Can you find me the other box? Without doubt, monsieur. It will be in the dustbin. He departed and returned in a few minutes with a dust-covered object. It was a duplicate of the box I held, save for the fact that this time the box was blue and the lid was pink. I thanked Francois, recommended him once more to be discreet, and left the house in the Avenue Louis without more ado. Next, I called upon the doctor who had admitted the poor dead man. With him I had a difficult task. Entrenched himself prettily behind a wall of learned phraseology, but I fancied that he was sure to know about this case. There have been many curiosities occurring of the kind, he observed, when I managed to disarm him somewhat. A sudden fit of anger, a violent emotion, after a heavy dinner, c'est entendu, then, with an access of rage, the blood flies to the head, and psst, there you are. Monsieur Delard had no violent emotions? No. But I made sure he had been having a stormy altercation with Monsieur de Saint Allard. Why should he? C'est évident. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. Was not Monsieur de Saint Allard Catholic, or the most fanatical? Their friendship had been ruined by this question of church and state. Not a day passed without discussion. To Monsieur de Saint Allard, Delard appeared almost as Antichrist. This was unexpected, and gave me food for thought. One more question, Doctor. Would it have been possible to introduce a fatal dose of poison into a chocolate? It would be possible, I suppose. Pure prussic acid might meet the case if no other chance of evaporation. Tiny globule on anything might be swallowed unnoticed, but it does seem a very likely supposition. A chocolate full of morphine or strychnine. He made a weary face. You comprehend, Monsieur Poirot. One bite would be enough. The unwary one would not stand upon ceremony. Thank you, Monsieur de la Doctor. I withdrew. Next, I made inquiries of the chemist, especially those in the neighborhood of Avenue Louis. It is good to be of the police. I got the information I wanted without any trouble. Only in one case could I hear of any poisoning having been supplied to the house in question. This is some eye drops of antophene sulfate for Madame Delard. Antophene is a potent poison, and for the moment I was elated, but the symptoms of antophene poisoning closely allied with that of potamine and bear no resemblance to what I was studying. Besides, the prescription was an old one. Madame Delard had suffered from cataracts in both eyes for many years. I was turning away discouraged when the chemist called me back. "Un moment, Monsieur Poirot. I remember the girl who brought the prescription. She said something having to go on to the English chemist. You might try there." I did. Once more enforcing my official status, I got the information I wanted. On the day before Monsieur Delard's death, they had made up a prescription for Mr. John Wilson. Not that there was any kind of making up about it. It was very simple tablets of Trentine. I asked if I might see some. He showed them to me, and my heart beat faster. For the tiny tablets were chocolate. "Is it poison?" I asked. "No, monsieur. Can you describe the effects?" "It lowers the blood pressure. It gives some form of heart trouble, angina resistance. It releases arterial tension. It's anti-cholesterol." I interrupt him. "Ma foi, this rigmarole says nothing to me. Does it cause the face to flush?" "It certainly does. And I suppose I ate 10, 20 of your little tablets. What then?" "I should advise you not to attempt it," he replied. "And yet you say it is not poison." "There are many things not called poison which can kill a man," he replied. I left the shop elated. At last, things were starting to make sense. I now knew that Mr. John Wilson held the means of the crime. But what about the motive? He had come to Belgium on business, asked Monsieur de Ford, whom he knew slightly, to put him up. There was apparently no way in which Delard's death could benefit him. Moreover, I discovered by inquiries in English that he had suffered for some years from a painful form of heart disease known as angina. There had genuine right to have those chocolates in his possession. Nevertheless, I was convinced that someone had gone to the chocolate box, opened the full first one by mistake, and abstracted the contents of the last chocolate, cramming it is instead many little tablets as it could hold. The chocolates were large ones, between 20 and 30. I felt sure it could be inserted. But who had done this? There were two guests in the house. Mr. Wilson had the means. St. Allard had the motives. Remember, he was a fanatic. And there was no fanatic like a religious fanatic. Could he, by any means, have gotten a hold of John Wilson's tablets? Another little idea came to me. Ah, you smile at my little ideas. Why, Mr. Wilson had run out of the tablets. Surely he had brought an adequate supply from England. I called once more to the house on Avenue Louis. Wilson was out, but I saw the girl who did his room, Felicine. I demanded her immediately whether it was true that Mr. Wilson had lost a bottle from his washstand some time ago. The girl responded eagerly. It was quite true. She, Felicine, had been blamed for it. The English gentleman had evidently thought that she had broke it and did not like to say so, where she had never touched it. Without doubt it was Juliette, always nosing around where she had no business to be. I calmed the flow of words, and I took my leave. I know now all that I want to know. It reminded me that all that remained was to prove my case. That, I felt, would not be easy. I might be sure St. Allard had removed the bottle of tablets from John Wilson's nightstand, but to convince others, I would have to produce evidence, and I had none to produce. Never mind, I knew that was the great thing. You remember our difficulty in the Styles case, Hastings. There again. But it took me a long time to find that last link which made my chain of evidence against the murder complete. I asked for an interview with Mademoiselle Maisonnard. She came at once. I demanded of her the address of Monsieur St. Allard. A look of trouble came over her face. Why do you want it, monsieur? Mademoiselle, it is necessary. She seemed doubtful, troubled. He can tell you nothing. He's a man whose thoughts are not in this world. He hardly knows what's going on around him. Possibly, mademoiselle. Nevertheless, he was an old friend of our deceased. There may be things he can tell me, things of the past. Old grudges, old love affairs. The girl flushed and bit her lip. As you please, but I feel sure now that I have been mistaken. It was good of you to acquiesce upon my demand. I had almost distraught at the time, but I see now there's no mystery to solve. Leave it, I beg you, monsieur. I eyed her closely. Mademoiselle, I said, it's sometimes difficult for a dog to find a scent, but once he's found it, nothing on earth will make him leave it. That is if he's a good dog, and I, mademoiselle, I, Hercule Poirot, am a very good dog. Without a word, she turned away. A few minutes later, she returned with the address written on a sheet of paper. I left the house. Francois was waiting outside for me. He looked at me anxiously. There is no news, monsieur? None as of yet, my friend. Oh, poor Monsieur Dillard, he sighed. I, too, was of his way of thinking. I do not care for priests. That I would say so in the house. The women are all devout. It's a good thing, perhaps. Madame is very prayerful, and so is Mademoiselle. Mademoiselle Virginie. She was très pieuse, eh? Thinking of the tear-stained, passionate face I had seen that day, I wondered. Having obtained the address of Monsieur St. Allard, I wasted no time. I arrived in his neighborhood of the chateau in Ardennes, but it was some days before I could find a pretext for gaining admission to the house. In the end, I did, how do you think, as a plumber, mon ami. It was the affair of a moment to arrange a neat little gas leak in the bedroom. I demanded that I depart for my tools and took care of the return within the hour, when I knew I should feel pretty well to myself. What I searched for, I hardly knew. The one thing needed, I could not believe there was any chance of finding. He would never have risked keeping it. Still, when I found a little cupboard above the washstand locked, my could not resist the temptation to see what was inside. The lock was quite a simple one to pick. It swung open, it was full of old bottles. I took upon them one by one with a trembling hand. Suddenly, I believed there was any chance of finding, he would not have risked keeping it. Still, when I was looking through, I suddenly uttered a cry. Figure to yourself, my friend. I held in my hand a little vial with an English chemist's label. On it were the words, trimmed to 9 tablets, one to be taken, when required, by Mr. John Wilson. I controlled my emotions, closed the little cupboard, slipped the bottle into my pocket, continued to repair the gas leak. One must be methodical. Then I left the chateau, took the train for my own country as soon as possible, and I arrived in Brussels late that night. I was writing out a report for the prefect in the morning, when a note was brought to me. It was from old Madame Dillard, and it summoned me to the house and avenue without delay. Francois opened the door to me. Madame la Baronne is awaiting you. He conducted me to her apartment. She sat in a large armchair. There was no sign of Mademoiselle Virginie. Monsieur Poirot, said the old lady, I have just learned that you are not who you pretended to believe. You are a police officer. That is so, madame. You came in here to inquire into the circumstances of my son's death? Again I replied, that is so, madame. I should be glad if you would tell me what progress you have made. I hesitated. First, I would like to know how you have learned of all this, madam. From one who is no longer of this world. Her words, and the brooding way she uttered them, it sent a chill to my heart. I was incapable of speech. Therefore, monsieur, I would beg you most urgently to tell me exactly what progress you have made in the investigation. Madam, my investigation is finished. My son was killed deliberately. You know by whom? Yes, madam. Who then? Monsieur de Saint-Allard. The old lady shook her head. You are wrong. Monsieur de Saint-Allard is incapable of such a crime. The proofs are in my hands. I beg of you, once more, tell me all. This time I obeyed, going over each step in the discovery of the truth. She listened to me attentively. At the end she nodded her head. Yes, it is all as you say, but one thing. It was not Monsieur de Saint-Allard who killed my son. It was I, his mother. I stared at her. She continued to nod her head gently. It is well that I sent for you. It was providence of the good God that Virginie told me before she departed for the convent what she had done. Listen, Monsieur Poirot. My son was an evil man. He persecuted the church. He led a life of moral sin. He dragged down other souls beside his own. But there was worse than that. As I came out of my room in the house one morning, I saw my daughter-in-law standing at the head of the stairs. She was reading a letter. I saw my son steal up behind her. One swift push, she fell, striking her head on the marble steps. When they picked her up, she was dead. My son was a murderer, and I only, his mother, knew. She closed her eyes for a moment. You cannot conceive, monsieur, of my agony, my despair. What was I to do? Denounce him to the police? I could not bring upon myself to do it. It was my duty, but my flesh was weak. Besides, would they believe me? My eyesight had been failing for some time. They would say I was mistaken. I kept silent. My conscience gave me no peace. By keeping silence, I too was a murderer. My son inherited his wife's money. He flourished as the green bay tree. And now he was to have a minister's portfolio. His persecution of the church would be redoubled. And then there was Virginie. She, poor child, beautiful, natural, pious, was fascinated by him. He had strange and terrible power over women. I saw it coming. I was powerless to prevent it. I had no intention of her marrying him. By the time when she was ready to yield everything to him, Then I saw my path clear. He was my son. I had given him life. I was responsible for him. He had killed one woman's body, now he would kill another woman's soul. I went to Mr. Wilson's room. I took the bottle of tablets. He had once said lightly that they were enough in it to kill a man. I went to the study and opened a big box of chocolates still on the table. I opened the new box by mistake. The other was on the table also. There was just one chocolate left. That simplified things. No one ate chocolates except my son, Virgin. I would have kept her all night. All that was going to make sure it all went to plan. She paused, closing her eyes a minute and opening them again. Monsieur Poirot, I am in your hands. They tell me I have not many days left to live. I am willing to answer for my actions before God. Must I go answer for them on earth also? I hesitated. But the empty bottom, madam. I said to gain time. How did they come to Monsieur de Saint Hilary's possession? When he came here to say goodbye to me, Monsieur, I slipped it in his pocket. I did not know how to get rid of it. I am so infirm and can't move about much without help. And finding it empty in my rooms would have caused suspicion. You understand, Monsieur? She drew up herself to full height. It was with no idea of casting suspicion on Monsieur de Saint Hilaire. I never dreamed of such a thing. Though his valet would have an empty bottle in his pocket, he thought he'd throw it away without question. I bowed my head. I comprehend, madam. And your decision, monsieur? Her voice was firm and unfaltering, her head as high as ever. I rose to my feet. Madam, I said, I have the honor of wishing you good day. I have made my investigations and failed. The matter is closed. He was silent for a moment, as was everyone else. Then she said it. She died just a week later. Mademoiselle Virginie passed through her novelite duties, a duty, and took the veil. That, my friend, is the story. I must admit, I do not make a fine figure of it, sadly. But that's hardly a failure, I interjected. What could you have done unthought under those circumstances? Ah, sacre mon ami, cried Poirot, suddenly becoming animated. Is it that you do not see? But I was 36 times an idiot. My brain cells, they had functioned not at all. The whole thing, the whole time. I have been true to the clues at hand. What clue? The chocolate box. Do you not see? Would anyone in the possession of their full eyesight make such a mistake? I knew Madame de Loire had cataracts. The drops told me that. There was only one person in the household whose eyesight was such that she could not see which lid she replaced. It was the chocolate box that started me on the track, and yet I had failed to perceive the real significance entirely. Also, my psychology was at fault. Had Monsieur de Saint Hilaire been the criminal, he would have never kept an incriminating bottle. Finding was proof of his innocence. I had learned already from Mademoiselle that he was an absent-minded individual. Although it was a miserable affair that I have recounted to you there, only to you have I told this story. You comprehend. I do not figure well in it. An old lady commits a crime in such a simple and clever fashion. I, Hercule Poirot, am completely deceived. Incroyable. It does not bear thinking of. Forget it, or no, remember it. And if you think of it at any time that I am growing conceited, it's not likely, but may to rise. I concealed my smile. Ah, bien, my friend. You'll say to me, chocolate box. Agreed? It's a bargain. After all, said Poirot, it was an experience. Who could have endowed the finest brain in Europe Who can afford to be magnanimous even if you are? Chocolate box, I said gently. Pardon, mon ami? I looked at Perrault's innocent face as he bent forward inquiringly. My heart smote me right there. I had suffered often at his hands, but I, too, though not possessing the finest brain of Europe, could afford to be magnanimous. Nothing, I lied, and lit another pipe, just smiling to myself. Now Agatha Christie's The Double Clue. But above everything, no publicity, said Mr. Marcus Hardman for perhaps the 14th time at that point. The word publicity occurred throughout his conversation with the regularity of a leitmotif. Mr. Hardman was a small, delicately plump, and exquisitely manicured man with a plaintive tenor of voice. In his way, he was somewhat of a celebrity and a fashionable life of his profession. He was rich, but not remarkably so. He spent most of his money zealously in the pursuit of social pleasures. His hobby was collecting, and he had a collector's soul. Old lace, old fans, antique jewelry, nothing crude or modern from Mr. Marcus Hardman. Poirot and I, obeying an urgent summons, had arrived to find the little man writhing in the agony of indecision. Under the circumstances, to call the police would be abhorrent to him. On the other hand, to not call them, it was to acquiesce the loss of some of the gems of his collection. He hit upon Mr. Poirot as a compromise. My rubies, Monsieur Poirot, the emerald necklace. It was said to belong to Catherine de Medici. Oh, the emerald necklace. If you'll recount to me the circumstances of their disappearance, suggested Poirot gently. I'm endeavoring to do so. Yesterday I had a little tea party, quite the informal affair. Some half-dozen or so people. I had given one or two of them during the season, though perhaps I should say I hadn't. They've not been quite a success. Some good music. Cora, the pianist, and Catherine Burr, the Australian contralto, in the big studio. Well, early in the afternoon, I was showing my guests my collection of medieval jewels. I keep them in a small wall safe over there. It was arranged like a cabinet inside with colored velvet to display the backgrounds. Wonderful for the sounds. After we inspected the fans, right after that, in the case over the wall over there. Then we all went to the studio for music. It was not until after everyone was gone that I discovered the safe had been rifled through. I must have failed to shut it properly, and someone seized on the opportunity to denude it of its contents. The rubies, Monsieur Poirot, the emerald necklace, the collection of a lifetime. But I would not give to recover them. But there must be no publicity. You fully understand that, don't you, Monsieur Poirot? My own guests, my personal friends. It would be a horrible scandal. Who was the last person to leave the room with you when you left the studio? Mr. Johnson. You may know him, the South African millionaire? He just rented Abbotberry's house in Park Lane. He lingered behind just a few moments, I remember, but oh, surely it couldn't be he. Did any of your guests return to the room after that in the afternoon on any pretext? I was prepared for that question, Monsieur Poirot. 3 of them did so. Countess Vera Roskanoff, Mr. Bernard Parker, and Lady Runcorn. Let us hear about them. Countess Roskanoff is a very charming Russian lady, a member of the old regime. She had recently come to this country. She had bade me goodbye, and was therefore somewhat surprised to find the room apparently gazing in rapture at my cabinet of fans. You know, Monsieur Poirot, the more I think of it, the more suspicious it seems to me. Don't you agree? Extremely suspicious, but let's hear about the other 2 first. Well, Mr. Parker certainly came here to fetch a case of miniatures that I was anxious to show to Lady Runcorn. And Lady Runcorn herself? As I dare say you know, Lady Runcorn is a middle-aged woman of considerable force of character who devotes most of her time to various charitable committees. She simply returned to fetch a handbag she laid down somewhere. Bien, monsieur. So we have 4 possible suspects: the Russian countess, the English grande dame, the South American millionaire, and Mr. Bernard Parker. Who is Mr. Parker, monsieur? The question to embarrass Mr. Hardman considerably. He is a young fellow. Well, in fact, a young fellow. I know. I had already deduced as much, cried Poirot gravely. What does he do, this Mr. Parker? He's a young man about town, not perhaps quite in the swim, if I may so express myself. How did he become a friend of yours, may I ask? Well, 1 or 2 occasions he has performed certain little commissions for me. Continue, monsieur, said Poirot. Hardman looked piteously at him. Evidently, the last thing he wanted was to continue, but Poirot maintained an exorable silence, and he capitulated. You see, Monsieur Poirot, it is well known that I am interested in antique jewels, and sometimes there is a family heirloom to be disposed of, which, mind you, would never have been sold in the open market to a dealer, but a private sale to me is a very different matter. Mr. Parker arranges the details of such things. He's in touch with both sides, and thus any little embarrassment is avoided. He brings anything of that kind to my notice. For example, Countess Ruskov has some family jewels with her from Russia. She's anxious to sell them, but Bernard Parker was going to have that transaction arranged. I see, Mr. Poirot said thoughtfully. And you trust him implicitly? I have no reason to do otherwise. Mr. Hardman, of these four people, which do you suspect? Oh, Monsieur Poirot, what a question. They're all my friends, I told you. I suspect none of them, or all of them, whichever way you like to put it. I do not agree. Your suspects have to include one of the four. It is not Countess Roscommon. It is not Mr. Parker. It is Lady Runcorn or Mr. Johnston. You drive me into a corner, Monsieur Poirot. You do indeed. I am most anxious to have no scandal. Lady Runcorn belongs to one of the oldest families in England. But it is true, it is most unfortunately true, that her aunt, Lady Caroline, suffers from most melancholy affliction. It was understood, of course, by all her friends that her maid returned the teaspoons or whatever it was as promptly as possible. You see my predicament? So Lady Runcorn has an aunt who is a kleptomaniac. Very interesting. You permit that I examine the safe? Mr. Hardman assented. Poirot pushed the back door of the safe and examined the interior. The empty velvet-lined shelves gaped at us. Even now the door does not shut properly, murmured Poirot as he swung it to and fro. I wonder why. Ah, what have we here? A glove caught in the hinge. A man's glove. He held it out to Mr. Hardman. It's not one of my gloves, he declared. Ah, something more. Poirot bent deftly and picked up a small object from the safe floor. It was a flat cigarette case made of a black moire. My cigarette case, cried Mr. Hardman. Yours? Surely not, monsieur. These are not your initials. He pointed to an entwined monogram of two letters executed in platinum. Hardman took it in his hand. You're right. They're very like mine, but the initials are different. There's a B and a P. Good heavens, Parker! It would seem so, Poirot said. Someone who careless as a young man, especially if the glove is his also, that would be a double clue, would it not? Bernard Parker, murmured Hardman. What a relief. Well, Monsieur Poirot, I leave it to you to recover the jewels. Place the matter in the hands of the police if you see fit. That is, if you're quite sure that he is guilty. See you, my friend, said Poirot to me, as we left the house together. He has one law for the titled, another law for the plain, this Mr. Hardman. Me, I am not ennobled. I am not on the side of them. I am on the side of the plain. I have sympathy for the young man. The whole thing was a little curious, though, was it not? Mr. Hardman suspected Lady Runcorn. There was I, suspecting the Countess and Johnston. And all the time, the obscure Mr. Parker was our man. Why did you expect that? Parbleu! It's such a simple thing to be a Russian refugee or a South African millionaire. Any woman can call herself a Russian countess, but anyone can buy a park and call himself a South African millionaire. Who's going to contradict them? I observe that we are passing through Berry Street. Our careless young friend lives here. Let us, as you say, strike while the iron is in the fire? Mr. Bernard Parker was home. We found him reclining on some cushions, clad in an amazing dressing gown of purple and orange. I have seldom taken greater dislike to anyone than I did to this particular young man, with his white, effeminate face and affecting lisping speech. Good morning, monsieur, said Poirot briskly. I have come from Mr. Hardman. Yesterday at the party, someone has stolen his jewels. Permit me ask you, monsieur, Is this your glove? Mr. Parker mentally processed things, and it didn't seem like he was doing so very rapidly. He stared at the glove as though gathering his wits. Where did you find it? He said at last. Is it your glove, monsieur? Mr. Parker appeared to make up his mind. No, it isn't, he declared. And this cigarette case, is that yours? Certainly not. I always carry a silver one. Very well, monsieur. I'll put the matters in the hands of the police. Oh, I say, I wouldn't do that if I were you, cried Mr. Parker with some concern. Beastly unsympathetic people, the police. Wait a bit, I'll go around and see old Mr. Hardman. Look here. Oh, stop a minute, but Poirot beat a determined retreat. We have given him some time to think about, have we not? He chuckled. Tomorrow we'll observe what has occurred. But we were destined to have a reminder of Mr. Hardman's case that afternoon. Without the least warning, the door flew open, and a whirlwind of a human being invaded our privacy, bringing with her a swirl of sables. It was as cold as only England in June can be, and a hat rampant with slaughtered ospreys. Countess Vera Roskanov was somewhat disturbingly there with a personality. You are Monsieur Poirot. What is it that you have done? You have accused that poor boy. It is infamous. It is scandalous. I know him. He is a chicken, a lamb. He would never steal. He has done everything for me. Will I stand by and see him martyred and butchered? Tell me, madam, is this his cigarette case? Poirot handed out the black moire case. The Countess paused for a moment while she inspected it. Yes, it is. I know it. What of it? Did you find it in the room? We were all there. He dropped it then, I suppose. Ah, you policemen, you are worse than the Red Guards. And this his glove? How should I know? One glove is another. Do not try to stop me. He must be set free. His character must be cleared. You shall do it. I will sell my jewels and give you much money. Madam, is it agreed then? No, no, don't argue. The poor boy, he came to me, tears in his eyes. I will save you, I said. I will go to this man, this ogre, this monster. Leave the Vera. Now it's settled. I go. With that little ceremony, she had come, swept into the room, leaving an overpowering perfume of exotic nature behind her. What a woman! I exclaimed. And what furs! Ah, yes, they were genuine enough. This curious countess have real furs, my little joke Hastings. No, she's truly Russian, I fancy. Well, so Master Bernard went bleeding to her. The cigarette case is his. I wonder if the glove is also. With a smile, Poirot drew from his pocket a second glove and placed it by the first. There was no doubt of there being a pair. Where'd you get the second one, Poirot? It was thrown down with a stick on the table in the hall in Berry Street. Truly, a very careless young man. Monsieur Parker was, well, mon ami, we must be thorough. Just for the form of the thing, I will make a little visit to Park Lane. Needless to say, I accompanied my friend. Johnson was out, but we saw his private secretary. It transpired that Johnson had only recently arrived from South Africa. He'd never been to England before. He is interested in precious stones, is he not? Hazarded Poirot. Gold mining is near his mark, laughed the secretary. Poirot came away from the interview thoughtful. Later that evening, to my utter surprise, I found him earnestly studying a Russian grammar. Good heavens, Poirot, I cried. Are you learning Russian in order to converse with the Countess in her own language? She would certainly not listen to my English, my friend. But surely, Poirot, a well-born Russian invariably speaks French. You are a mine of information, Hastings. I will cease puzzling over the intricacies of the Russian alphabet. He threw the book from him with a dramatic gesture. I was not entirely satisfied. There was a twinkle in his eye which I knew of old. It was an invariable sign that Hercule Poirot was pleased with himself. Perhaps, I said, you doubt her being Russian. Are you going to test her? Ah, no, she is Russian. All right. Well then, if you really want to distinguish yourself over a case, Hastings, I recommend First Steps in Russian as an invaluable aid. Then he laughed and would say no more. He picked up the book from the floor. dipped it into his curiosity, but could neither head nor tail could I make of Perrault's remarks. The following morning brought us no news of any kind, but it did not seem to worry my friend. At breakfast he announced his intentions of calling upon Mr. Harding early in the day. We found elderly society butterflies at home, but seemingly a little calmer than the previous day. Well, Monsieur Poirot, any news? He demanded eagerly. Poirot handed him a slip of paper. That is the person who took your jewels, monsieur. I shall put matters in the hands of the police, or would you prefer the recovery of the jewels without bringing the police into the matter? Mr. Hardman was staring at the paper. At last he found his voice. Most astonishing! I should infinitely prefer that there was no scandal in this matter. I view carte blanche, monsieur. I am sure you will be discreet. Our next procedure was to hail a taxi, which Poirot ordered to drive to the Carlton. Then he inquired for Countess Roscanoff. In a few minutes, we were ushered up to the lady's suite. She came to meet us with outstretched hands, arrayed in a marvelous negligee of barbaric design. Monsieur Poirot, you have succeeded? You have cleared this poor infant? Madame la Comtesse, your friend Mr. Parker is perfectly safe from arrest. Ah, but you are a clever little man, superb, and so quickly, too. Oh, on the other hand, I have promised Mr. Hardman that the jewels shall be returned today. So, therefore, madam, I should be extremely obliged if you would place them in my hands without delay. I'm sorry to hurry you, but I am keeping a taxi. It is in case it should be necessary for me to go to Scotland Yard, and we Belgians, madam, we practice the thrift. The Countess had lighted a cigarette. For some seconds she sat perfectly still, blowing smoke rings and gazing steadily at Poirot. She then burst into a laugh and rose. She went across the bureau, opened the drawer, and took out a black silk handbag. She tossed it lightly to Poirot. Her tone was when she spoke, perfectly light and unmoved. We Russians, on the contrary, practice prodigality. And to do that, unfortunately, one must have money. You need not look inside. They are all there. Poirot arose. I congratulate you, madam, on the quick intelligence and your promptitude. Ah, but since you were keeping your taxi waiting, what else could I do? You are amicable, madam. You are remaining in London long? I'm afraid not, owing to you. Accept my apologies. We shall meet again elsewhere, perhaps. I hope so. And I do not, exclaimed the Countess with a laugh. It was a great compliment that I pay you there. There are very few men in the world whom I fear. Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot. Goodbye, Madame la Comtesse. Pardon me, I forgot. Allow me to return to your cigarette case. And with a bow, he handed her the little black moire case he had found in the safe. She accepted that without any exchange of expression, just a lifted eyebrow and a murmured, I see. What a woman, cried Poirot enthusiastically as he ascended down the stairs. Mon Dieu, quelle femme! Not a word of argument, protestation, or bluff. One quick glance, she had seized upon the position correctly. I tell you, Hastings, a woman who can accept defeat like that with a careless smile will go far. She is dangerous. She has nerves of steel. He tripped heavily. If you can manage to moderate your transports and look where you're going, it might be well, I suggested. When did you first suspect the Countess? Mon ami, it was the glove in the cigarette case. A double clue, shall we say. That worried me. Bernard Parker might have easily dropped one or the other, but hardly both. Ah, no, that would have been too careless. In the same way, if someone else had placed them there, to incriminate Parker, one would have been sufficient. The cigarette case or the glove? Again, not both. I was forced to the conclusion that one of two things did not belong to Parker. I imagined at first the case was his, and the glove was not, but then I discovered the fellow to the glove. I saw it was the way the other was on the way out. Whoever, then, was the cigarette case? Clearly it could not have belonged to Lady Runcorn. The initials were wrong. So Johnson? Only if he were under a false name. I interviewed the secretary, and it was apparent that Everything was clear and above board with him. There was no retenance of Mr. Johnson's past. The Countess, then. She was supposed to have brought jewels with her from Russia. She had only taken the stones from the settings, and it was extremely doubtful they were ever going to be identified. What else could have been there for her to pick up on one of Parker's gloves from the hall that day and then thrust it into the safe? But bien sure, she did not intend to drop her own cigarette case. But the case was hers, then why did it have the initials BP on it? The Countess's initials are VR. Rose smiled quietly at me. Exactly, mon ami. But the Russian alphabet, in Cyrillic, V is V and P is R. Well, you couldn't have expected me to guess that. I don't know Russian. Neither do I, Hastings. That's why I brought my little book and urged it to your attention. He sighed. A remarkable woman. I have a feeling, my friend, a very dedicated feeling. I shall meet her again. Where, I wonder? And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. There's 23 other mysteries in this book, and as some of you will probably notice, I've had no book in my hands this whole time. That's because this little story, or rather this little series of stories, is available on Hoopla for you to read, as well as available on both Cloud Library and Hoopla for you to listen to someone who's a little better at, say, good English or a bad Belgian accent than I am. The name of the book, again, is The Early Cases of Hercule Poirot by Agatha Christie. And perhaps if you're not tired of listening to librarians read books that you might want to consider to read yourself, later on in the month we'll have a presentation called Classics Cut, where we'll be, well, we as in myself and two other librarians, will be reading some of Fahrenheit 451, a little bit of another situation where you can get a taste of a story before you get a chance to try it for yourself. Again, you can check this out on Hoopla. It's free with your library card. You can listen to it on Hoopla or Cloud Library. If you're listening to me now, you have the technology to do it. We'd be glad to show you how to do it at the library. Take a listen for yourself. Explore both apps. Find something you enjoy. And you'll be hearing from me very shortly. This has been Word of Mouth.